Yeah, we can get started, and if Darren doesn't join, then which he hasn't responded, then we can. I think the three of us can fill the time that we have.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Okay, and we are on. Thank you, everyone, and sorry for the delay. We had a bit of a last-minute technical glitch, but everything got sorted out. Darren, if you're out there, just please raise your hand using the virtual function, and we'll get you in. We were looking for you. Hopefully, you're able to log in. So anyway, today is October 27th. We're a week away from November 3rd. And I'm sure a lot of you, especially in this group, have been talking about politics pretty much all throughout this month. Everything is very political these days, whether if it's on social media, whether if it's amongst your colleagues, friends, or neighbors, families, or just even in comedy and entertainment, everything is politics, which is great. But in my opinion, as an organizer of this group, I believe that politics is an art of persuasion. Yes, you have other authoritarian regimes where politics is based on rule of intimidation and force and oppression. But in a free society, we believe in politics as persuasion. And this election has come down to a wire where you have two candidates, Democrat and Republican. They have competing visions for what America should be, which direction they want to take America into. And I guess the spirit and intent of tonight's discussion is to highlight the records and achievements of, tonight we're going to talk about President Trump, but next time it'll be on Joe Biden. Highlight their records, and the panelists that we have will tell us why President Trump should be reelected. I would describe tonight's meeting format akin to like a job interview. When you go in for a job interview, you want to highlight and accentuate your positives. You're not going to go in there and talk about all your baggages and scandals and whatever else that have been lodged at you. You want to make the best persuasive argument so that you get a job. And to me, I think a president's role is, it's like a job interview to the voters, because you're telling the public writ large why you should be either elected or reelected. And the title of this event is Closing Arguments, and that kind of has like a jury trial component to it, because us as voters were the members of the jury, and this campaign has been going on for quite a while now. And now these candidates, as they're a week out from the election, they're making their closing pitch to the voters. Now, granted, a lot of them are spending their time in swing states. Still, we want to know what their visions are for the country. And I know sometimes with these discussions, it gets very partisan, because obviously we live in a very divided times. If you are not satisfied with what you hear, then, well, you could go vote for the other guy. I want this to be as non-adversarial as possible. And I know you're probably thinking, well, it's politics. How can it not be non-adversarial? Well, we have adversarial discussions all the time. In fact, just about everything we talk about in this group is quite adversarial. We do it in a very civilized manner. But for tonight's discussion, we're just going to ask all of the attendees just to have an open mind, listen to the presenters, and they will explain to you in good faith why they believe that President Trump should be reelected. And at the end, at the conclusion, if you are still not convinced, then so be it. You are not persuaded, and that's how politics works. So, we're not going to get too much into the scandals, the impeachment, the Russiagate, or what happened to Omarosa. To me, that's irrelevant. To me, what we're going to talk about is what the vision is moving forward. So the format for tonight's discussion is we'll spend about an hour or so with the presenters, and then there will be some questions back and forth between me as the moderator and the panelists. And then after that, we will open it up to Q&A from the rest of you. So with that being said, let me pass it over to our panelists. So again, we have so far Andy, Matthew, and Jen. Hello. And I guess I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay. So my name is Andy Aiken, and a little about myself is that I grew up in Indiana. I was born and grew up in Indiana, and then I came to New York about 8 years ago. I grew up in a very staunchly, I would say staunchly Democratic family. My dad ran Democratic campaigns at a national level. He ran congressional campaigns and mayoral campaigns. And so I was very active in the Democratic Party. I would say I consider myself on the right, but I would say that that move to the right was it's not like I changed my values. My values stayed the same. It was how to achieve those ends. Okay, so
Oh, my sweetie, I love you.
can you hear me or no?
Yeah, there's some bleed through.
Michael, can you please mute your audio? And everyone else who are not panelists, please mute your audio. Sorry about that, Andy. Go ahead.
Okay. So in any case, what I'm gonna be talking about. So I'll be talking about, when we come back to me, I'll be talking about what the case for let's say a center liberal or center progressives to vote for Trump will be. And I think there's a very strong case for that. There is no perfect candidate in any race, but I think that there's a strong case to be made here. Jim?
Okay, I'll go next. Hi, everybody. So first, I want to thank Thomas for organizing and Andy for inviting Matt and myself to speak along with him. My name is Jennifer, and I'm going to read off of my paper, even though I know my own story, because I don't want to forget anything here. Let's see. So I consider myself a proud, patriotic American and member of Generation X. I'm the third generation in my family born in this country, and with heritage 50% from Slovakia and the rest German and Norwegian. My dad is an attorney. My mom worked in banking. I was raised in a Republican household, and we were always very patriotic, conservative values. I went to Penn State, and I moved to New York. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania outside of Pittsburgh, and moved to New York about 24 years ago to start a career in publishing. And I have a daughter who is a millennial in her 20s. I'm in my 40s, she's in her 20s, and she's mixed race and bisexual. And she recently earned a graduate degree from Edinburgh in Scotland. So just to give you a little idea who you're speaking with here. And that's it. And I'll pass it over to Matt.
All right, well, hello, Thomas. Thanks for the invite to be here. And Michael, Sammy, Lindsay, Rory, James, nice to meet you and to share some space with you. So my name is Matt, and I am from New York. I am born and raised. I have been, I guess, a self-styled independent for my whole life. I was phone banking for Bill Clinton before I could vote in 1992. I guess I was 14 years old. And had done campaign work, door-to-door stuff in Pennsylvania for John Kerry and Barack Obama. And I was there at the inauguration in 2008. I have always been interested in politics. And so during the in-between years, I've always been interested in reading and educating and talking to people and changing, my idea of what's important over the course of my lifetime as I'm 44. Voting for Donald Trump was the first time I'd ever voted a Republican in my entire life, which was a surprise, but it wasn't when I focused in on why I was doing it, which was a very positive thing. I wanted change. I wanted to see the left held accountable for something that I think they fell asleep on during the Obama years, as far as anti-war, which is probably my biggest issue, was anti-war. And so that's really kind of where I'm at. I look forward to talking with the rest of you and hearing what you have to say. Thanks.
Okay, so I guess that's back to me. So what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be spending about 15 minutes to talk about a liberal or progressive case for Trump. So that obviously would be met with a lot of maybe disbelief that how could there be a liberal or progressive case for Trump when there's a Democrat running a race? There's Kamala Harris, who has these, let's say, these California progressive credentials, maybe not impeccable credentials, the top cop of California. But I'm going to be talking about a positive case for Trump instead. And so in order to introduce this, rather than just lay out a case, I have to give a little bit of maybe a prelude to this. And I think there's some things that I would put forward. It might be a little bit controversial to think about, but I think that there's different ideas of what progressivism is that have existed in American history. And certainly the progressive movement of the early 20th century is different than what exists today, no question about that. But there's a strain of progressivism that still is very much alive in the United States. And you hear it in a lot of our politics in both parties. And that is a progressivism I think is a little stronger in states like Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin. These were the Dutch immigrants that landed in Michigan and Wisconsin. They were the La Follette Republicans in Wisconsin. These were the Nordic immigrants into places like the Dakotas and Minnesota, where they brought very progressive and what we would today think of as somewhat lefty values, and brought them into their politics. And that was a very strong strain in progressivism for most of the 20th century. Candidates like Walter Mondale and George McGovern were very much representative of this strain of progressivism. And what we've seen emerge over the last 20 years, I think, is something very different. It's I want to say it's without casting this as a negative. To me, it's a negative, but I'm trying to be neutral. A kind of European import. It's an import from Frankfurt, where we have these. It's a different view of progressivism. It's a post-Marxist view of progressivism, and it, instead of emphasizing like social equality, it emphasizes these different versions of truth. That truth is embedded in our racial and gendered categories and so on. And so what I think is different about these versions, and maybe I'm stereotyping a little bit, but I'm trying to emphasize some differences and make a case. That whereas I think this earlier form of progressivism, this mid-century, 20th century progressivism, that it emphasized a set of democratic and egalitarian ideals that I grew up with and I still hold on to very strongly. This idea that, hey, everybody has something to contribute, and that we should, that there's not, that we shouldn't just revel in our class status at the exclusion of other people. And so I guess what's happened though, along with, so there's a lot of reasons why this sort of new progressivism has emerged. And especially what you see in the cities like New York, which I've seen living on the Upper West Side, is that there's a kind of emergence of a red Tory progressivism. And this was something that existed in England. Like Marx talked about, he was really upset when he wrote about how the peasants, they helped Napoleon III come back to power and take the throne again. And he was really upset at this. And he called them the lumpen proletariat, because they were like too ignorant to understand their the fact that they could have achieved a different type of change, that they just helped this monarch come back to power instead of doing something better. And the British, then when the Tories wanted to fight the Whigs that were coming and doing all these reforms, they were reforming how laborers were paid and work conditions and all these things. And what you had happen is the Tories decided, hey, we've got to stop this. And so they figured out how to get the peasants on their side. And so the Tories of the mid 19th century were about the king and the people. and they would fight these kind of middle class reformers that were trying to actually do something about improving working conditions. Well, in any case, I think that what's remarkable to me is that there's sort of emerged this kind of gentry liberalism in the 21st century. And part of it's because of the things like information economy. We've got, these office jobs, and you get paid really well for not, getting your hands dirty and things like that. So there's part of that. Also, all different types of occupations, like journalism used to be a working class profession and a working class job. I mean, Walter Cronkite, when in his autobiography, wrote about how he thought that the decline of journalism was in part because it stopped being a working class job, and journalists were removed from the people that they were writing about and reporting on, and that was part of what hurt journalism. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. That in a way we've divided into these kind of more like castes than classes, and the classes may always exist, but we can do something to mitigate them maybe. Well, so what my case is that Donald Trump is something unique. It's that he really, in a sense, is a Democrat. He's an old Democrat in Republican clothing, and he is reforming the Republican Party for the better, and he's already changed it for the better. One of the reasons that he's changed it so let me just give one example how he's changed it for the better, is that have you heard anything about, we got to strike down Obergefell versus Hodges? No, Republican Party doesn't care. I mean, this was a landmark decision, essentially legalizing gay marriage across the United States, saying that no state could basically decline to offer some type of marriage. And no Republican is campaigning against that. They don't care. Donald Trump was for gay marriage 20 years before the Democrat politicians evolved around to it. He was just personally, he didn't care. I mean, it was like, hey, you come to work, you make me money, I don't care. So, so I think that Donald Trump has already moved the Republican Party away from these types of cultural wedge issues, but he's emphasized an entirely different set of wedge issues. And so I'm going to be talking about those. And what those are a set of class issues that I think are still, they're not going away. And what's ironic is the Democratic Party used to be very good at appealing to these issues, and they've walked away from these issues. Donald Trump has very intently focused on them. And that's why I think he won states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, Wisconsin this last time. And let's see what happens this time. But those are going to be close races, I think, regardless of who wins them. So I think, but the one thing I would say is that, so maybe the first thing that I would emphasize is that Donald Trump is the first president since Reagan, which was is actually before the dawn of my political involvement, is when I was a teenager. But Reagan was the last president to not take us into some kind of major war up until Donald Trump. And this is when I talked about that kind of upper Midwest progressivism. That was a very important issue for them, and it's why Democrats prevailed in large part, because they were opposed. They tended to be more opposed to the Vietnam War. And it was, in Indiana, where I grew up, there was very strong anti-war president who was, Senator Birch Bayh, who was also a very strong pro-growth Democrat. So he was on economics, he was pretty kind of right, center-right maybe, but on the Vietnam War, he was very against it. But Donald Trump has not taken us into any new wars. And this goes against even what I would say, the soft internationalism of Barack Obama brought us, where we were involved in a lot of these places, bombing weddings and pushing out people like Gaddafi, who had more or less agreed to denuclearize. And we pushed that guy out just because, who knows, he threatened what we perceive to be our interests in that country, in North Africa. But regardless, Donald Trump has not been pushing out anyone. And so I think that as a result of this, he's gotten enormous opposition from the CIA and the intelligence community. And that alone to me is, I mean, if just think about if someone really threatened those agencies and what they thought their role in the world should be and our role in the world should be, I mean, what the CIA does is propaganda. So what a large part of the so-called news about Donald Trump has been, he uses the term fake news. I would just say it's outright propaganda. The whole thing of Russian disinformation or collusion and all of these things. This is the sort of thing that in the color revolutions that have happened in the Middle East and some other countries, they were largely, I mean, let's face it, they have the CIA's fingerprints all over them. And I'm not being conspiratorial. It's just a fact that they were involved there, and we were very openly involved there. Trump basically said, no, we're not going to get involved in Syria, even though I've got all of these establishment foreign policy people like John Bolton pushing me to do it. I'm just not going to get involved in another conflict there because it's going to push us into war with Russia and Turkey and so on. So what did we do? We pulled out, and we're less involved militarily than at any time since Reagan. And to me, it's just remarkable. I didn't have this hope that Donald Trump would bring this, but he's been very much on promise on this issue. So I think that is, to me, the first thing that I would say is the first progressive argument. And you go back to Clinton, you go back to Barack Obama. They have more of, it's not necessarily a neoconservative approach to politics, but they definitely see America as having a role in installing the right people in place in different countries. And I think that as Trump was positioned by a few foreign policy experts that I actually do agree with recently, is that he's a realist and he has restraint when it comes to foreign policy. And so he's achieved a lot of very positive things. That we see the first multilateral agreement with Israel ever since their founding. There was the 1967, it was called the Khartoum Resolution, where all the Arab countries after the 6 Days War, which Israel basically obliterated Egypt in this war, and it was such a humiliating defeat for Egypt that all the Arab countries, they got together and they signed this Khartoum Declaration that said, or a resolution, which said no negotiation, no reconciliation, no peace. The three no's. And so for the first time, and Sudan is where Khartoum is. Sudan is one of the signatories, so was Bahrain. All these countries were. And Trump is brokering a peace that already has 5 signatories on it, and in addition to Israel, which I find amazing. I can't tell you how many times we came to the brink of this in the past, in my lifetime, and it never happened. And here it's actually happening. I think it's an enormous step forward. So that's one thing. He also just the other day seems to be brokering a peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which is another positive thing. So I think Eisenhower was, as from a progressive standpoint, the favorite Republican speech of all time for many progressives is Eisenhower's farewell address, in which he referred to the military-industrial complex as having this undue influence on our politics, and that it could potentially, going forward, have a negative influence on the country. And he was proved correct. Just 4 years later, we were already embroiled in Vietnam, and not just as advisors. And so he was proved correct before he even died, 9 years later. And I think that we've seen that again and again in our politics. And I think that we call it the military, industrial, media, uh, academia complex, but they've been very much allied against Donald Trump because of he's showing that we don't have to be at war, we don't have to be involved militarily to achieve peace. Like he just said, I saw him say that without blood in the sand and for no money, we're starting to achieve peace in the Middle East, which is to me amazing. Okay, so that's one thing. I think that I would just say that on a lot of issues, to think about just how deep this opposition among the establishment is. And when I say establishment, I don't just mean like people that are Democrats and so on, but I mean Republicans. There was the very influential group of Republicans for many years on both domestic and foreign policy, were neoconservative may be one term to refer to them, but a set of establishment pundits that they still to this day are very anti-Trump, and mainly because of foreign policy and military policy. But that to me is a very that their dislike for him is a very positive thing. So that's one. But I think if you look at economic policy, I sort of referred to this kind of progressivism and egalitarian ideals, and I think that Trump is achieving that as well. That one of the things that's happening on domestic policy, one of the things that's happened is, and we've had many trade policies that have, I think, been beneficial to people, to sort of the, let's call them the gentry liberals, people like me, that are doing well in the information economy, but not so good for people that are in, if you've ever ridden the Acela and you see the Acela, you ride in the Acela corridor down to Philadelphia, then you see North Philly is not benefiting, has not benefited well in the economy. The factories are bombed out in Trenton and North Philly, and all throughout the Midwest and places like Youngstown, Ohio, that they went very strongly for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, but then switched to Donald Trump in 2016. And it's because they didn't see the change that they felt they were going to get from Barack Obama. And what that change that they were looking for is at least some sort of economic revival. And I think that the start of that, it's not complete, but the start of that has happened under Trump. One of the things that he's done is, I think, been very effective at getting, at least making progress on trade. One of them was the USMCA agreement, which actually does increase the level of US worker involvement in, unlike what existed before, where essentially there was these free trade zones and so on, where companies from the US could move virtually all of their manufacturing to Mexico with little consequence. And what happened then, after they were moved to Mexico, they were moved to even cheaper locales to do manufacturing because Mexico was too expensive. But what this deal does is that it provides tax incentives for companies to keep jobs in the United States and not move them to Mexico, not move them further than on. And it also increases worker protections. That was one of the common complaints by progressives for many years about a lot of these free trade agreements. They essentially are undoing what happened in the Great Society. They undoing worker protections here and there, environmental rules. Well, all of those things, really the trade unions got a lot of their wish list in the USMCA that they did not get in NAFTA. So it's, in a sense, it was like, for this could have only happened under a Republican president. So that's number one. I think that the tough stance against China has been, it's not achieved the deal yet, but and that's, I think, been a source of a lot of the like ad buys and things like that, I do think that there's a very intent effort to get Trump out because it's perceived that the Democratic Party would be more amenable to China and their interests than Donald Trump and the Republican Party. But I think he's achieved, made progress. We're close, and also helping to normalize relations with North Korea a bit. I think has been very, very positive. That I'm kind of switching back to foreign policy a bit, but I think that ties into China because I think part of the reason that we had such negative relations with North Korea is because they were being funded by China. I think that we've stopped some of that flow of money to North Korea, and so they've become a lot more willing to work with us and not shoot missiles over Japan. But I think on economics, what we've seen is that across from the time that the tax cuts were made in 2017, we've actually seen across all income quintiles, we've seen increases in real wages, real income. And that's a pretty remarkable change. I'm not just saying that, I'm going to say that Barack Obama was horrible, Donald Trump is great, but we did have an economic crisis and a recession that we were coming out of in the early 2010s, but we've really seen accelerate the growth up until COVID, we've seen it increase across all economic strata, and that's a very positive thing, something that we haven't seen really in 40 or 50 years, and so that's been a very positive change, and that speaks to what I think the egalitarian ideals of progressives would want to see. We'd want to see that as a consequence of any kind of change of tax policy. The last thing that I'll talk about before handing it on is I think that the other thing that I don't think that there's two other things I don't think that Trump has gotten enough credit for, and one is actually his response on COVID was something that I don't think that has been really given the credit that he deserves on it. And I work in healthcare sector, and the one thing that he's done that I don't think any other president would have done with quite the aggressiveness that he did was to really lift get the barriers that, it's not that the FDA is bad, but they do have a lot of process, and a lot of it's unnecessary in the sense of like the bureaucratic back and forth. And it's not to say that any kind of standards have to be lowered, but it's just all of the meetings and having meetings, the planned meetings and so on, the bureaucracy. He's really cleared the thicket of that in order to get new therapies to market. And it's been remarkable that getting a drug like remdesivir, a Gilead product, and some of these others that are a lot cheaper, that's an expensive one, but there are some that are a lot cheaper that are coming to market that I don't think we'd see that in normal times. And so that took a lot of, I can tell you, it took a lot of courage and fighting in order to get that to happen, because there have been many presidents, over the last, well, I would say pretty much every president since Lyndon Johnson have wanted to reform this, and they weren't able to get it done. And Donald Trump made it happen. He used a crisis to make it happen, but he made it happen. He used, and I would say this isn't something that a traditional Republican would have done, used the Defense Production Act to essentially commandeer GM and some other companies to make ventilators and masks. And so that there were people on the left who challenged him to use the Defense Production Act to do this. And he did, in a limited sense, much more limited than I wanted, but he did. The other thing is that I think that although we're still in this pandemic and we still have to take it seriously, I think that the thing that we've all seen is that a lot of people are really being hurt by the lockdowns. And New York is not the city that it was. And the city's dying, frankly. And we all want it to come back, and it's not going to be easy. But I think that Donald Trump is the one that's wanting it to come back as quickly as possible. And he's urging us to bring it back. And it's got to be a combination of local and state and federal working together. He can't force this to happen, but I think he's the one that's urging it to happen, because I do think it's the right thing for us to come back from this as quickly as we can. So the last thing I'll touch on that Donald Trump has talked about this. He talks about it in his typical Donald Trump way. And I'm going to talk about it maybe in my own Andy Aiken way. And that is that I think that Donald Trump has really, more than any Republican, I would say going back to Eisenhower, I think that Trump has done more for racial equality than any president since Eisenhower. And he said Lincoln, but I'll say Eisenhower because I think Eisenhower did a hell of a lot, and he doesn't get credit for. But I think that Trump will mention the funding, the 10-year funding he's provided for historically Black colleges and universities, criminal justice reform. But I would also emphasize things like the fact that there's been in 2018 and 2019 there were record numbers of Black businesses being created, Black-owned businesses being created, and unemployment for Black people and Hispanics being at record lows up going into COVID, and then the wage increases happening with Black and Hispanic in excess of what we saw for white college educated people. So I think this, again, it speaks to a set of egalitarian values. And I think that Donald Trump cares about these things. As I said, he's more like a traditional Democrat than he is a Bush Republican. So that's my case, and I look forward to questions after we're all done, but thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And let's see, Matthew or Jennifer, do you guys want to go next?
Mm-hmm. Let's see, I'll jump in if that's okay. Yeah, just to back in on what Andy said. Donald Trump is the peace president. Donald Trump has not started a single foreign war. Donald Trump is not feeding and arming his cronies like we learned with George Bush and Halliburton. We've not learned in 4 years that he's got money deals for people that we all don't like, right? Like the warmongers and the deep pockets of corporations. He's got all the right enemies when it comes to that. And I think that's why he's so lambasted and attacked in those regards. But just to repeat what Andy said, we're not in any foreign wars. Our Middle East peace deals, right? There's been no saber rattling. There's nobody in the world that would think that if Hillary Clinton was the president, that we would have diplomatic relations with North Korea, or there'd be any Middle East peace brokering with Syria, Israel, Saudi Arabia, even certainly, right, and working with Palestine. But I'm just going to keep it simple and local, which is also why I support him and will. Is that, just economic reasons, Trump is making the case for getting the country back to work. Joe Biden, I challenge you, is Joe Biden, is he offering anything other than Orange Man is bad and he said bad things and I'm here to replace him? There's no argument. You can't make an argument. I'd love to hear the argument that's pro-Biden that doesn't involve anti-Trump. Like, I want to hear the pro-Biden argument that doesn't have anti-Trump. I don't think there is. And I think that's a big problem for people who are thinking of voting for him. But for economic reasons, Trump tax cuts, for example, like the majority of Americans, like 70% of Americans benefited from the tax cut. So if you have a kid, your child tax credit doubled. It's easier for, you get a 20% offset for people who have side hustles and side gigs. And for small businesses that have lost their lease, that will lose their business if they haven't, due to rioters and lockdowns. You know, we were told that manufacturing was not going to come back in this country very explicitly by the prior president. And we've shown that, like, no, actually there is. Has there ever been, seriously, a better American jobs president who has defied all of the naysayers, right? So to me, that's the thing. It's like, if you strip out personality, and I understand why you wouldn't like him on personality, it's effectiveness, which is why people still support him. It's because he hasn't, to his own people, unlike other presidents, made promises during elections and then reneged on them as soon as he got in office. There might not be enough wall for people that voted for him for the wall, but it's not like he did a full 360. It's not like he talked about and ran on closing Guantanamo Bay and then did nothing about that. Like, there hasn't been a reversal of what he ran on. So there's a lot of consistency on what he said he was going to do and what he's done. And I think that's kind of the first time I've ever seen that in my own lifetime, my own political lifetime. You've ever seen, oh, well, you have to compromise and you have to say things to get elected. And he seems to be the outlier on that. Like, that hasn't ever happened. I think it shakes people. And I think because he pushes back, which a lot of people really like. Like, what you see is what you get. And a lot of people don't like that. And I can understand that. But again, it's his effectiveness, which is exciting. He is for the American people and jobs and economy. And in the worst, of this pandemic in the past 7-8 months, done his best with, I think, listening to like establishment science up to a point. And then it's like, okay, we also have to think about thinking for ourselves. And I appreciate that. Like, there isn't just, that's the American, that is part of our character. Like, listen, you got to work and think for yourself. We can listen to, officialdom out the wazoo, and we have, but at a certain point, you have to just live your life and take your shots and take your risk. And if you're looking for a pure, perfect, man or woman without a record, good luck. That's not going to happen. I would say look at the effectiveness, look at the record, and look at the results. Look at the results. Like, and look at his enemies. Look at the level of still pummeling, pouncing. Can you separate the personal attack from the attack on the record? I don't know. I don't know if people can anymore. It's very, very decisive. Are Trump supporters violently rioting and beating people? No, they're not. Have all the bad things that we said in 2016, that, friends, people that came after me and stuff, did a single thing happen? No. The selective memory of, like, well, things at the border, people in case, did that not happen beforehand? Yes, it did. So I would suggest that what he's doing is pulling your dark side out. He's making us look at who we really are and saying, you know what, I think we can do a lot better. And we have let's work with reality versus what would work on paper, right? Like, it's like meeting somebody. It's like thinking you're not going to like them because they don't have traits on paper, but in real life, you really actually have good chemistry and connection. So I think, just to kind of, summarize it simply, he says what he's going to do and he does it. It pisses people off that don't like it. They don't like his brusque Twitter. If your only argument is, I don't like his Twitter, and I think that maybe he doesn't like women, that's not an argument in 2020. That might have worked in 2016, but the actions and the results of this person, he's proven people wrong, and I think it's going to happen again. And I think that the left has a lot to learn. The left needs its own Tea Party, in a way, to decide whether it's a corporate party And the same with the Republicans too, which are still battling that, right? Like, who are you? Are we Americans, or are we for like the two-sided corporate oligarchs, you know? And who's going to stand up for Americans, even if they don't agree with them politically? I think Trump is more that than Joe Biden. Joe Biden has not made the case to both halves or many halves of the country. Joe Biden is an idea. He's not a candidate. He's something that's, I don't understand. Nobody's excited about Joe Biden except they're excited to vote against Trump. Like I'd love to meet some of you here now. I'd love to see your smile and your joie de vivre. I don't think it exists. I think that you have to bite your tongue and do it because you don't like the other guy. But talking amongst yourselves, it's like you have to vote for bottom of the barrel Joe. Why didn't we get Bernie Sanders? Why didn't you get Tulsi Gabbard? Why not?
Mhm.
So who were interesting, you know? So I'm saying jobs, economy, he gives a damn about American livelihood, and he makes a real pitch to American people. So that's my 2 cents. 3 cents, it's going up.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Andy and Matt. I'll go next. And again, I'm gonna read off my paper because I wrote down my thoughts and I don't want to forget anything that I wrote down. So for me, as I mentioned, I was raised in a conservative family, conservative household, and my dad was into politics, so I started to get into it a little bit, you know, in college and things like that. And then as time wore on, I just saw that the Republicans weren't doing much, and they always seemed to be like, as I say, a gentleman loser, where they kind of just, you know, do everything on a handshake. And then if it doesn't work out, oh, well, they just didn't seem to have the spirit or the fight in them that I felt these values deserved when it came time to stand up for them politically. And so then when 2012 was happening, I really thought, excuse me, I think differently of him now, but at that time, I really thought that Romney was a good candidate, that, you know, I mean, he donates a lot to charity. He's a good businessman, the American dream type of guy. And then I just felt after he was doing so well in the debates, he sort of seemed to like disappear from the campaign trail and stand down. And it just didn't seem to make any sense to me. And then Obama surged and won. And then Romney didn't really seem to care that he lost. And I thought, but this is a terrible, horrible thing that's about to happen. We're about to get 4 more years of this. I can't believe that you don't really seem to care. And so then I just started going, you know, down the rabbit hole and trying to find out why this could possibly be. And that's where my eyes were open to the fact that both parties have what we can all call, in this discussion, we'll call globalist tendencies, where there are a lot of rhinos, dinos, you know, Republican in name only, Democrat in name only, but they're really one party that doesn't necessarily work for the advantage of the people, the American people, the way that they're supposed to, and maybe has other interests that are larger than America at heart. And so then I thought, you know, it was kind of depressing to realize that, and to know that, to feel that I had been like betrayed all this time. And so then I thought, but these values in America are still important, and somebody will surely come along that will, you know, see that and re-energize it. And then Trump came down that escalator and I didn't know what to expect because, you know, I liked watching The Apprentice. Everyone knows about Trump. He is known in celebrity circles. I think we all remember that, even though the media tries to make us forget. And he had friends of every race, color, and creed. And he's an American dream type story and a showman, let's not forget. So when he came down that elevator, I was so excited, but I really had no idea what to expect, just like everyone else. But when he opened his mouth and started talking, I just knew that my heart was like fulfilled. Like it just, so I've been on the Trump train since day one. And I mean, he has not let me down. And he always says that, like he says to his constituents, which is everyone actually, he says, I'll never let you down. And so with that in mind, now I'm going to turn to, I feel when you're voting, and maybe we all agree with this part, there's 3 things that we base our vote on. whether you're for or against somebody's personality, their record, and what's at stake. So for me, even though personality shouldn't matter that much, it always does. You know, they always say you can't win in politics if you don't have charisma, if you don't have, you know, something going for you in that regard. And some people vote only on personality, which I think is a huge mistake, because obviously politicians are very well seasoned in making you, you know, telling you what you want to hear and making you feel good about them, even if they may not be in your best interest, etc. So, and I know that he has a lot of detractors personality-wise, but it's funny because we know we're a polarized society now. We all live in, you know, these different worlds, almost different bubbles. And it's funny because a lot of the women that I know, especially that are Trump supporters, we just love this man so much. Like, I know he can be crass sometimes, but it's kind of like, when he is, it's kind of funny, I'm sorry, like, or it's really funny. And because he doesn't mean it seriously. He has a great family. So he likes beautiful women, like what man doesn't? And he's not afraid to say that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, we all have been in our girls' night out or boys' night out talking about, you know, the opposite sex. Now, he just does it in public, maybe a little too much sometimes, and that's not okay. But I mean, the fate of America is at stake. Do I care that he makes, you know, crass comments or, you know, says the wrong thing on Twitter sometimes? I really don't. Like, there's just too much at stake. And so in keeping with the personality for a little bit, I just want to say a little more about why I love it so much. So, well, number one, he also didn't have to do this. I mean, he had this amazing, successful life as a billionaire, millionaire, whatever you think. He still has more money than probably all of us put together. So he didn't have to do this, but he felt a calling. And even in his old age, he could just go off into the sunset or sit on a beach, and I won't even say drink martinis, because I don't know if you know this, but he famously doesn't drink. So he felt a call of duty, he answered the call, and he was also born on Flag Day, which is very interesting. So now he's 74 and he has more energy than, again, probably most of all of us put together. He loves his job. He's like the CEO of our country. He sees it that way. He runs it that way. He fires people that way. He hires people that way. And it's just so refreshing. Let's see. And again, back to, like, you know, some people say, oh, he can be boorish sometimes, but look at the assaults that he gets. And I think it's very interesting when people say he has thin skin, because I actually think he has the thickest skin. I don't know who could withstand the slander, the bias, everything that is thrown at him, basically his entire presidency and before it even started, and still be happy and smiling every day and excited to go to work. I mean, he holds roundtables like a CEO does that the media doesn't really talk about very much, whether it's with law enforcement, the Black community, religious people. He wants to talk to every group. He wants to talk to every constituency and see how he can help them, because he's a problem solver. And that's what CEOs do. They have a problem, they want to solve it, their reputation is on the line, and he takes it very seriously and very personally. Let's see. He's also clever, sharp, funny, and wicked smart. And I think that I find it so strange that as a lot of New Yorkers just don't see that he has their own brand of humor. Like, his humor is very like noir, very dark, very New York. And I just get a kick out of it every time he says something sharp or witty or has a good comeback. And I don't know if you have seen any of his rallies lately, but at one point he started doing some grandpa moves, dancing at the end of the rally to the song YMCA, and everybody loves it. And the thing is, he just did it the first time, like, as you know, like a spontaneous thing, but now the crowd will go crazy if he doesn't do it. So he has to do it every time now. But he's very endearing. There's even a little teddy bear that you can get off of, they sell it on TV. It's called a Trumpy bear. And I mean, people just love this man also because he's like a protector in chief. He's there for all of us, and all he wants to do is make America the best it can be. And in keeping with this, I want to show you real quickly. I hope it'll come through. This is my favorite picture of him. This was a spontaneous moment at CPAC 2019, where he came out on stage and he hugged the American flag. So this is the Trump that Trump supporters know and love, okay? And these moments are not scripted. And the other thing that I would like to say is that he's very transparent. he's willing to take questions at any time from anybody, unless it's out of line. Like if someone is being disrespectful, and, you know, we've all seen those moments, then he might say, you know, no, but he's just commanding respect in that case. For the most part, 99% of questions thrown at him, he answers. He holds press conferences. He talks on his way to the helicopter. And even if it's because he loves the spotlight, like, is that the worst thing in the world? Or is that a good thing? I think it's great. Like, he has no qualms about telling you how he feels, answering your questions, and not having to have like a prepared script all the time that tells him what he can and can't say in order to appeal or not appeal to certain groups. Like, he's just, this is how I feel. So that's the first part. The second part to me is his record. And of course, that's what we're all here mostly to talk about. And if we're being honest, record is the thing that you should vote number one, no matter if you hate the person, hate how they talk, etc. So we all know MAGA, and we all know that's the extrapolation of that is America first. And who among us in the entire country can disagree with this? And the fact that it's been they've tried to twist it into like white nationalism is like, what? Like, it just boggles the mind that they think I don't know. Like, does anyone know a white nationalist? Because I don't. And I've been in a Trump supporters group for like a really long time, and I come from Western Pennsylvania. I've never met one in my life. And I just, it's very interesting to me that they try to put that spin on it, because it's patently false. So then the next thing I want to say, just listing off some of the things that, I just listed off some of the things that come to mind. But the first thing I should mention is that there's actually a website that aggregates his accomplishments, or the administration's accomplishments, and it's called magapill.com. So MAGA pill, like a pill that you take, .com. And it's summarized and sourced. So when you click into each accomplishment, it has a little, like, one paragraph summary, and then it gives you the source for that information. And I mean, it's a really long list. So, but you wouldn't know it if you watch the fake news. And that's why he calls it that. And I have to admit, like, again, they twist it and say, oh, but he doesn't want a free press. It's actually the opposite. That's what he wishes that we had, because as Andy was saying, it has become so bad that it's like propaganda, where they completely twist actually what happened, and then they put the truth like in the headline, and then they put the truth at the bottom or something. Like, it's very disturbing, and it's like information warfare. And it just, it's I mean, what can you do? We have to battle it. Republicans have always had to battle it, but no one so much as him. So just my favorite issues, like if someone said just off the cuff, what are your favorite parts of his record? The one thing that comes to mind is the veterans, bringing accountability to the VA for veterans, where people that worked in the Veterans Administration couldn't be fired. Veterans had to wait for so long to get a doctor's appointment or get into the hospital, and some of them would die, unfortunately, during the wait times. So as a CEO of America, he said, this is unacceptable. If people are not doing their jobs, they have to go, period, end of story. And then on top of that, veterans should not have to wait. If there's a waiting list, then they should be able to go to another hospital outside of our network, and we'll pay for it. Very simple. It's common sense. And so these kind of things, again, he's a problem solver, and he also wants accountability, and he wants it done fast. And honestly, I think those qualities of a CEO are also why he has had so many accomplishments in such a short time. So the next one that's near and dear to my heart, again, because my daughter is mixed race, is, as Andy was touching on, and maybe Matt did too, I'm not sure, but what he's done for the Black community. And again, it hurts me to no end that they don't advertise this, and they call him racist, which is the worst slander you can pin on anyone, and especially without evidence, because, or any reason to do it, because not only is it a slander on that person's character, but it really, I mean, I don't think it's a racist country where racism exists. And so what you're doing is denigrating the experience of people that have actually experienced involvement with racist people. And so that kind of takes away from their experience, and I don't think that's appropriate at all. So with the Black community, as Andy mentioned, the historical funding for HBCUs, and Trump loves telling the story. I don't know if you've ever heard him tell the story, but he says, you know, they come in and they're, you know, talking and we're getting along and everything's going great. And then they say, okay, see you next year. And Trump's like, but I said, why? Why do you have to come back? And they're like, yeah, we have to come back every year. And the way Trump tells it, he said, that's crazy. Like, you should have long-term financing so you can plan. And so you don't have to come, they said, you know, we feel like we have to come back begging every year. So he said, no, we're going to fix this. And he gave them 10-year funding so they can plan it out. And I mean, again, CEO just solving problems. Lowest Black unemployment rate in history, and for Hispanics, going on for many months. The Opportunity Zones, which was a bipartisan initiative authored by Senator Tim Scott, a Republican, and enacted through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which empowers the governors of each state to designate economically distressed communities that were ripe for investment and tie them to a brand new federal tax incentive to drive private investment into our nation's most distressed zip codes. Had to definitely read that one off the paper. I agree with how he supports the police unequivocally or whatever, while advocating for dealing with bad cops, of course. And most Black people will tell you that police presence in their communities is needed more, not less. So when these people say defund the police, who are they speaking for? Like, did they ask these communities if that's what they really want? Because I wouldn't want that if I mean, who doesn't want safety, law and order? He inspired Candace Owens to start the Blexit movement, which is the Black exit from what she calls the Democrat plantation. In general, the Black community's values are conservative values. They have just been lied to for decades and told that Republicans are racist, and that's why they have to stay away from them. And I run a MAGA book club, and we read a book by, I should have written down the name, but he's a conservative commentator on Fox, a Black guy that used to be Democrat and became Republican. And it was his story of how he was wakened to the lies that are told about Republicans and how he was really angry about it. And he's a staunch conservative now. The most dangerous cities in our country are Democrat run for decades and have become basically, I hate to be harsh, but it's true, killing fields for people of color. Again, it hurts my heart to no end. Let's see. Trump has held young Black leadership summits at the White House, but of course it's never reported in the media. Or not, I shouldn't say never, because that's too extreme, but it's rarely and not, covered very widely. Okay, so just moving on from that one, cutting regulations to unleash the greatest economy in the history of our country, handling the pandemic, I think brilliantly. One of the greatest things he did in this whole thing, amongst others, as the other two were saying, is he instantly put a freeze on not only student loan payments, but the interest. And see, again, that goes back to a businessman mentality, knowing that, okay, if I stop the payments, the interest will still be accumulating. So their bill is still going to be going up for later. So that's 9 months of interest-free, no payments that you have to make, that with the stroke of a pen, he said, gone, done. We're not even going to talk about it. These people should not have to worry about that. And that, that helped my daughter, that helped me. I mean, it was just amazing. I don't know if you know this, but he donates his salary, and he has to take $1 for legal reasons, but every quarter he picks a different area of the government that needs the money, and he gives them his money. And I just have a feeling that if it was Barack Obama doing this or another Democrat, there would be pomp and circumstance and fanfare every month announcing who he was giving his salary to and how great of a noble gesture it was. But of course, they never talk about it. He added Space Force to the military, 3 Nobel Peace Prize nominations and 1 already for next year, pulling us out of the Paris Accords because it was super unfair to us. We would have had to go into it immediately, where other countries that are worse polluters had years until they had to comply. Right to try, where you can try medicines if you're terminally ill that haven't been approved yet. Getting rid of NAFTA, as Andy said, and replacing it with the USMCA, which is more fair to America. Draining the swamp, and I think this is the reason they hate him so much. And then the last thing I'll say is just to give, just to be fair. Yes, it's true he didn't get to healthcare, but it's only been 3.5 years, and he did eliminate the individual mandate, which is where you're forced to buy health insurance even if you, don't have the money. And even though my state, New Jersey, put it back on a state level, which is kind of messed up, but whatever. So he's working on that. And see, they try to hit him and say, oh, but you didn't do healthcare. Okay, but he's gotten so much done. I mean, give him a break, So the last part of what I wanted to chat with you about is what's at stake. So recently someone, and I should have sourced the quote, but I don't remember, but someone recently called him the bodyguard of Western civilization. And I think this is entirely true. You can call it populism, nationalism, whatever you want. And those are not dirty words, by the way, even though they want to say that they are. They are the true meaning of power, of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I just feel that America is the greatest experiment in human freedom that has ever existed on this earth. And if America falls to socialism, communism, Marxism, all these things that the left tries to put under the guise of things that it's not entirely true, and they just kind of cloak it in they cloak these issues or these systems in things to like make people feel bad. Like if we give into that and America falls, there will be nowhere else to go. As one of the speakers at the RNC famously said, he was an older Cuban gentleman whose family came here from Cuba, fled communism. And those are the people that really get it. Those are the people that really get that there's no like soft and fuzzy socialism, communism, or Marxism. And that is what we're up against. And so it is the most important election in our history. And I just feel that there's really a lot at stake. So in closing, I just want to say, personality-wise, if you haven't voted yet and you're still kind of on the fence or trying to decide, watch a Trump rally. He did 3 yesterday and 3 today, and there's more coming. And the best place to see them is on RSBN, Right Side Broadcasting Network, because they show from the beginning to the end. They show the crowds and everything, thousands of people for 5 years straight. On his record, he always says, we're winning, winning, winning. And so there's we have so much fun as Trump supporters. We're not tired of winning. We love saying that. So we're not tired of winning. There's still room on the Trump train for you guys, anyone to come on board anytime. And then the last thing is, but also in that, you guys might have heard of Marie Kondo, the organizing guru. And the way she explains organizing is, does this item that you need to get rid of or keep, does it spark joy? And so you can extrapolate that to many areas of life to decide on things. And I feel like with Trump, does your candidate spark joy? And I think Matt had said something like this. He sparks joy for me. We just love being Trump supporters and talking about all the great things he does and all the great funny jokes that he says. And so then the last thing is what's at stake, to summarize. As he has said at his rallies, this is the most important election in the history of our country, and it must be what he calls a thundering defeat and rebuke of socialism. And a vote for Trump is a vote for the American dream. And then, as he would say, what the hell do you have to lose? And I feel that if you vote for Trump, you have nothing to lose. But if you vote for the left, I won't even just say Biden. If you vote for the left, the answer is a lot. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. We're going to move on to the next segment where I will ask some questions to the presenters based on the presentation. I will limit it to just what was presented and not kind of go out of scope. So I guess I'll start with Andy. I heard that from your kind of a description, it seems like I think you described President Trump as a Democrat in a Republican sheep's clothing or something to that effect. And I think you had mentioned that a lot of these wedge issues of yesteryear or yesterdecade, same-sex marriage, it's no longer highly contentious. But wouldn't you say that on issues of abortion, that's still a very highly contentious matter?
Yeah, well, I mean, so let me talk about my position and Trump's position on that. It certainly is a contentious issue, but what's made it contentious is that, so to quote Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she was interviewed about this, well, she actually made some very controversial statements about it. I consider it very controversial that we that we made the decision at the time because people were concerned about population growth, especially the population growth within certain populations that we didn't want to grow as much, which she was just very blunt about that. But the thing that she said also about it that I thought was very interesting is that it might have been a mistake because the Roe v. Wade might have been a mistake. Now, by the way, if Roe v. Wade goes away, which I'm not saying it will, it is a precedent. and it's been reinforced in other decisions like Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And so it's not like it just gets thrown out, but let's say that it did. It goes back to the states. It doesn't ban abortion, and nothing's going to change in New York. Other states will decide to ban it. And but what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said is that she thought that it was a bad decision, or that she questioned this. She didn't say it was a bad decision. She said question the decision because it created a culture war that then, from her standpoint, inhibited the whole set of progressive issues from coming to pass. That it might have been that more progressive economics policy might have succeeded in legislatures and so on, but because of this abortion issue, it created a national issue of something that was probably better resolved at a state and local level. And so I actually agree with that reasoning. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with what she viewed as the positive outcome, but I think that's a very interesting analysis. I think it nationalized not just abortion, but a whole set of culture issues that we're really better off rather than having this federal kind of juggernaut tell us all how to live one way or the other. That had we had a little bit of federalism, a little bit of a more decentralized way of handling these issues, then we wouldn't be at one another's throats to the extent that we are today. So I would say that it might be just add to the contentiousness. There's no way around it. I mean, clearly, a lot of conservative jurists view something like Roe v. Wade as an abomination, not because it's abortion, but because it took something that not mentioned in the Constitution at all, and it was they imposed this a trimester structure. Again, it wasn't based on scientific reasoning. It was based on a set of just trying to triage the situation, and they did the best they could. I'm not saying that it was entirely bad reasoning, but on the other hand, it's created a federal issue of something that probably should have been a state issue. And I think that's where things will probably go eventually, or it'll get chipped away. But let me just say where I think Amy Coney Barrett and Gorsuch are very, very strong, and in a way that not just conservatives like. I think that Amy Coney Barrett has actually been very positive for Fourth Amendment rights, and she ruled on a number of cases where she ruled against qualified immunity, which has been a big issue, and some of these questions of police brutality and so on. She's ruled favorably, or on the, let's say, the civil libertarian side, on Fifth Amendment issues as well, and how evidence was collected. So I guess that's Sixth Amendment, right? So she's been, not despite all the noise, she's not been against civil liberties. And Gorsuch, even more so, has been a pro civil liberties justice. Even more so than conservatives like, let's put it that way. That, where there are conservatives that don't like Trump, or people that call themselves on the right who don't like Trump, and they endlessly beat on the Gorsuch issue. But I think that Gorsuch has been a good judge, and I think that Barrett will be good from what I know of her, and I think that that Trump has appointed some good justices. And but I think that it won't, if she really is an originalist, then it won't all come down on the liberal side or the conservative side. It will come down on the side of what interpretation of the Constitution is, and it won't just favor conservatives.
So on economic issues, it was just 10 years ago that we saw the rise of the Tea Party. And if you were to ask the organizers or even the participants, it was all about government spending. That was just 10 years ago. And now we're seeing record government deficit and debt. and it seems like that issue has no longer come to the forefront for conservatives. So do you think Trumpism is kind of a rebuke of some of the issues that the fiscal conservatives were espousing just a decade ago?
You know, that's a very good question. I don't see either Trump or Biden as addressing that issue at all. Because if you look at, for example, Biden's policies, and I know it's the case, the question is on Trump here, but I'll just mention that I mean, they're planning, you know, trillions of dollars of spending over the next several years, over the next 10 years or whatever on these different programs. But clearly, COVID has posed a huge challenge. We were chipping away at the deficit was reducing. It was still very large. It was still in the $700 billion range, which is not good, but it was declining from the start of Trump's term. But now it clearly went, you know, in multiple trillions of dollars this year to pay relief payments and so on for the COVID crisis. But I think it's a reckoning that I don't think either party is really paying any attention to anymore, because I think there's a reckoning that's coming on it, and I don't see either party really treating it. I do think, though, the only way really out of it, besides, I mean, we can say higher taxes, but to be honest, look at New York. I mean, where you're scraping people that are higher income are already paying 60% of their total income in taxes. That's not a marginal rate. That's a total tax. And so it's already near the limit of what people are going to be willing to pay and are able to pay and keep businesses going. So there's either going to have to be spending reductions, or the third case is economic growth. And so I think that Trump has the better growth plan, better plan for economic growth than the other side. But I think it's an issue that's not being addressed by either party, to be honest.
So just looking back, wait, hang on one second, please. Just looking back in retrospect, when President Trump came in, he did have the super majority. And do you think he should have maybe placed his priorities on some other fiscal measures? Because one of his first legislative accomplishment was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And perhaps, you know, when he had the supermajority, do you think he should have done some kind of like a sequestration where you have automatic budget cuts? Again, if that's the biggest burning issue of the day, do you think maybe his priority should have been focused elsewhere instead of having tax cuts? Because by most estimates, tax cuts will actually reduce government revenue to a tune of, I think, over $1 trillion. I've read estimates of 1.5 trillion for the next 10 years. So do you think maybe he should have focused on cutting spending instead of tax cuts?
That's a great question. Well, I think you know, one of the issues is that where Trump is really different from other Republicans is that he's pretty much said that Social Security and Medicare are off the table. Which, well, I mean, they're going to have to go on the table eventually, but he's not putting them on the table. So that's one issue. But those two entitlements are they're not considered discretionary spending, but they're really a very, very large portion of the budget. The third being military spending, of course, and then after that, maybe interest on the debt. So it's those are the four biggest items. So, you know, where do we cut spending? We have to cut a whole bunch of smaller programs and things that you know, that hit specific groups more than others. One of the things that you know, I would like to see cut more is like farm subsidies and so on. But to answer your question, I think it's part of the issue is, I think, you know, if you talk with people that supported Barack Obama or Democrats, they would look back on the 2008-2010 time period as a huge wasted opportunity, that all they got passed really was Obamacare. And even then, you know, they did it at the last minute because Scott Brown got elected in Massachusetts, and they had to do it something at the last minute, and nobody had a chance to read the bill, and on and on. And so that's all they really got passed in 2 years. Well, why is that? And why did what happened happen in Trump's first 2 years? And the answer is, in my view, is it's institutional politics. That you had 2 years of the Republican House being led by someone who was completely anti-Trump, Paul Ryan. This guy was brutally against Trump, and so you had in his own party. You think, well, why can't they just agree on things? Well, that's how much Trump went against the Republican establishment and against let's call it Romneyism or whatever you want to call it. But basically, Paul Ryan said you have to do this first. You know, I'm not touching anything else until you get my priorities through and you sign this and so on. And so that's what happened. I think, yes, I would have liked to see a lot of other things happen during that time period, a lot of other reforms happen. And but you had an attempt to what Trump calls repeal and replace Obamacare. And he does have a plan. He does have I think, is a very good plan that's based on a lot of things that have been done in certain states in the country, like Indiana and other states, where they've been able to provide a lot broader coverage, more universality of coverage with maybe a little bit less government spending. But regardless, they couldn't get that passed because you had John McCain, you know, with his thumbs down, and in spite. And so I find it, yeah, I wish that a lot more had been accomplished in Congress with that majority. But I think it's the opposition within his own party that stopped it.
Jennifer, do you want to add something?
Yes, thank you. It's interesting because as a true conservative, I did used to fret and worry about spending, government spending, and say, you know, why can't they just do a budget every year and then figure out how to pay it off? Or why can't the whole world just say, we'll forgive all each other's debts and start over? Like, why can't this just be solved? And so we have to stop hearing about it and stressing out about it and worrying about it. And as I mentioned in my presentation, I run a book club and we do MAGA type reads, but we also read, like we read Saul Alinsky, for example, Rules for Radicals. We read 1984, you know, so we go out from just, you know, we don't read all Trump books or something. But I put the book club on break every summer. And this summer, because in the summertime, then we'll read something that's a lot longer or heavier. So this summer, we read a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island, A Second Look at the Federal Reserve by G. Edward Griffin. And I feel like if you want to be scared about the financial system and frightened, but also knowledgeable, read this book, because it talks about the history of central banking from before the United States was created, and then gets into how the Federal Reserve actually came to be. And, you know, with JP Morgan family involved and the Rothschilds, all these different groups and families and people. And basically our entire financial system is all smoke and mirrors, and it is not tenable to continue. So it's not just our debt, it's like the entire global banking system. And he even makes the point that taxation isn't even really necessary, but they just do it in order to make people feel like they have a stake in the whole process and give them something to fight about, like look over here instead of over here. So again, if you want to know about central banking and maybe have some questions answered in your mind, like why are things like this? Oh, because they create money out of nothing, basically, as we all know. Like they print money, they make it out of nothing. And he goes into the whole mechanism process of how that works and how it's distributed and how it's quote created. And it's utterly fascinating. It's about, I think it's close to 1,000 pages or maybe 700, I'm not sure, but it's a pretty good read. And I recommend it to anyone who's interested in the financial system.
Okay. Let's bring Matthew into this conversation. Matthew, you had mentioned about how you support trade policies under President Trump, especially, I think you called it the manufacturing comeback. What do you think about the farmers? Do you think the farmers were also, did they benefit under this trade deal? Or do you think, do you oppose to certain aspects of the farm subsidies that had to be allocated in response to the trade deal?
Right now they're being hit pretty hard by. I think that actually the tariffs on things like soybeans and so on were dropped. But yeah, the thing to keep in mind is, well, I'm against tariffs. I mean, let's say at a philosophical level. I mean, I'm much more for free trade at a philosophical level, but I don't think it's always possible. And I think that what Trump's doing is smart negotiating. So let me give an example of what I mean by that with China specifically, which is where we really have the conflict. We're not putting tariffs on other countries right now. It's China really that we're going on this war with. And what that's about is that China within the World Trade Organization is still classified as a developing country. Now, there is some truth to that, to the sense that they still have like whatever 600 700 million poor people, and I think a lot of that is very deliberate policy that they've allowed to exist, and they've got the Hunger Games going on with allowing the cities to be the citadels of wealth and playgrounds for oligarchs, and the poorer regions are, in some cases, no better off than they were under during the Cultural Revolution, barely better off, and concentration camps for the Uyghurs and so on, but I think that the real challenge is that they have a very favorable position within the World Trade Organization. They're able to impose higher tariffs on the United States than we impose on them, when what the World Trade Organization says is that there should be reciprocity. And so our GAP says that there should be reciprocity. So I think that if we had reciprocity, then tariffs would be very low between the countries. And but the challenge is not having 25% Chinese tariffs on US goods when we're imposing 2% or 3%, which is what existed in the past prior to Trump. So what Trump is doing is saying, well, I'm going to follow the WTO guidelines. And if you want to challenge this, then you have to go in front of a WTO court and all this sort of thing and challenge it. And so I think he's putting the Chinese in a very awkward position, because in the past, the US presidents would go along with it because they saw China as this very fast growing economy where they wanted a market for US goods, which of course we do. But I think we've come to a point where they're eating a little bit too much of our economy in a way that our other trading partners do not. When the Japanese really started entering, really started hitting us hard in the auto industry in the 1980s, in the early 1980s, late 70s, I guess, when it really started, that there was at least some balance that eventually occurred, in the sense that there were very large manufacturing plants in the United States for Japanese cars. Town originally grew up. There's a large Honda, BMW plants. That's Europe, of course, but nonetheless, there's not the same desire for, I think, between the United States and China for mutual success, or at least that's the way that it's been. And I think the incentives have been a bit off. And so the answer to your original question was in regard to farmers being hit. And I think that, yep, he's more or less kept a kind of subsidies program in place to make them whole while we're going through this. But I'd like to see less subsidies over time. And we may never completely get rid of them, but I'd like to see less over time. And I think his trade advisors would be the ones to do that, but it's not going to be tomorrow. We're in a longer term battle with China that's going to probably take a generation to completely resolve.
Matthew, you want to respond to any of the questions about trade or manufacturing?
It's funny. Andrew said exactly what I was going to say, so there's nothing I can.
Okay.
No, that
Just
I
yeah.
I appreciate. No, I appreciate that because it's he's more informed in that than I am. I just want to see trade fair, and I want to see the U.S. farmers taken care of in a way that we seem to care about agriculture around the world. And I think it's only decent, and I think that's being done. So while it might not be perfect, at least I hear Donald Trump making a case for supporting American farmers and farm workers and doing his best versus, you know, let's say the argument for the past few years that's been like, you know what, the golden era of American agriculture and business is over, and what we need to do is build up the third world in order to be, you know, sort of equal with everything, and we have to get used to not being competitive. I don't believe that Joe Biden's making any case to American farmers or the, you know, Rust Belt for sort of out trumping Trump as far as like, we're going to make your lives better. I think American farmers are only in better hands with Trump.
All right. So on the issue of trade, I know you're a proponent of like a manufacturing comeback and better American jobs. I think a lot of voters will probably be against presidents, no matter which party, picking winners and losers. And I do remember reading some articles about how President Trump was telling Americans to boycott Harley Davidson because it didn't really comport with his, I guess, objectives for his, you know, trade agenda. As well as I remember reading some other reporting about how he hereby ordered American companies to find like an alternative to doing ventures in China. So do you think that kind of like a stronghold or grip on these companies, do you think that's the right approach? Or do you think that is too, commandeering, that's probably the right word for it, these companies that are normally left to the free market?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think boycotts work. I think boycotts are emotional appeals to the public, and the public makes their vote with their dollar. And if somebody, whether it's Gillette or Goya or Harley Davidson, like, yeah, you have the right to personally boycott that, but I don't think that it works en masse the way I think the way the right doesn't boycott as well as the left boycotts. The left boycotts excellently, quickly. Although the Goya thing, the right did buy quite a lot of Goya. Remember 100 years ago when it, all of a sudden, because somebody said something positive, you had to then, so I would just say no. I think I wouldn't agree with him with that statement. Like, now we're going to boycott Harley Davidson. We're going to do whatever Donald Trump wants. By the way, that is not the camp that I'm in. If it's assumed that if you're a Trump supporter that you are on board with everything that he's ever said, everything he's ever proposed, everyone he's ever hired, everything that they've ever done, you are in an information bubble, and you probably don't have, maybe this is the first time, like actual human contact with somebody who has a multi-dimensional experience of what it means to be informed and to, take a side. So that's what I would say. I would say no. I think the boycott statements that he makes are probably just big statements that he can get with. It doesn't ring with me as something I need to follow.
Yeah, I think a lot of things that Trump says on some of these issues, and this is just my view, they're intended to jawbone people into certain kind of action. And I personally, it wouldn't be my approach myself, but I think they're intended to jawbone a kind of result that he wants to see, and do it without him taking any kind of action at all. And it's his approach, and it's worked for him. Let's put it that way. It's worked for him. He gets a response. He gets a reaction. And then what happens on some of these issues is that it sort of, as if you're not familiar with the phrase, it shifts the Overton window. So to speak. It broadens the scope of reasonable discussion on an issue like, well, should Harley Davidson be doing this or not? Or is this the right thing for an American company to do? To be taking tax breaks and then doing this? And so it opens the discussion as Matt says, a kind of an emotional way, but people connect on issues. Many people connect on issues emotionally rather than on the facts and the logic of the case. And it's his way of broadening the number of people that are actually following a case.
Yes.
But it wouldn't be my personal way of doing it. But then again, I'm this kind of intellectual. I've got, all these books and so on, and that's what fascinates me. But he's got his ways of doing things, and I think that he's intended to get a result where it broadens the discussion and involves more people.
I would just like to add that I agree with that. I don't remember the details of the Harley Davidson thing, but I do remember that I wouldn't have known about it if he hadn't mentioned it. And honestly, one problem I have had with politicians in the past is that they are a leader. They're supposed to lead. They're supposed to say things that are unpopular if that's how they feel, or that's the policy that they're trying to put forth because they're in charge. And going back to what Andy said, it works for him. And the reason I think is because that's how we all function in our daily lives. Like if you're a parent, you don't just say to your kid, well, I'm not going to tell you what I think. We'll just, you'll figure it out. Or, I want to keep it a secret until like X time in the future when it's better to say it to you. Like, I don't know. It's just all leaders have to take stands. And I think he does that very well. And it's for good reasons if you agree with his whole theme, which is America first. And does that mean he's always right? No, of course not, because everyone makes mistakes. Everyone can get things wrong. But if he feels that an American company is betraying American workers, then I really feel that it's great to say that and to call them out and then see how they handle it, because he's not afraid to speak out. And like Andy said, it brings more people into awareness of the issue. And I think that can only be a good thing.
Okay, moving over to foreign policy. I know, Matthew, you had mentioned quite a bit about how you support his policies of disengagement from these military conflicts. I think we had some very close calls. I remember like the first few months into his presidency, we've had very close calls with North Korea, and then they were able to have the summits and then kind of have like a rapprochement. And then also there was another almost like a nuclear showdown, I thought, with Iran, especially right after the assassination of the Major General Soleimani. So do you think his foreign policy, is this kind of like by design, or do you think it's somewhat of kind of like impromptu and the outcome is, it just so happens to kind of fit with this vision?
Yeah, well, I think that a couple things. I think that he has, all right, the way that Trump works is that he'll set the broad outline and then he delegates. He's a delegator. And I think there's been a number of, if I could say that there's one thing that I would say Trump has made some mistakes on, it's on some of the people that he's hired. And the people that he's hired, I think, I'm not going to say they were forced on him, but they were an intended olive branch to some part of his party, some group that was opposed to him. He's trying to make peace with some faction or think tank or whatever. He's trying to show that, I'll listen to you. And I think that someone on the chat brought up Bolton. And I think definitely Bolton would not have been his first pick. I think that they have opposite personalities. They wouldn't agree on anything. And he probably took this guy on thinking that he could manage him, but Bolton wanted to run the show himself. And so I don't think that he didn't last for that reason. But I think part of the issue is that he had Tillerson in, and I think that Tillerson from day one was working against Trump actively, and kind of steered things in a different way. than Trump wanted it to go. So I think that Pompeo has been aligned with Trump. I think that people like the Lighthizer and what I'm going to forget the name, but is his some of his negotiating teams with China, that they're much closer aligned with his own thinking, and so I think that that some of his early picks were steering things in a different direction than he wanted it to go. But I think some of it, to your point, is a deliberate desire to engage in conflict in order to bring all of the issues down on the table. And if you read his books like Art of the Deal and so on, it's like this this kind of bombarding the other side with the I don't say threats, but the kind of objections in order to force the transparency and the openness that results in a better deal, and a deal that everybody likes. If everybody walks away from it, hey, I got a good deal. So so I think that's very much Trump. That's 100% Trump, to force a conflict in order to achieve actually less conflict in the end. Because look at how over 30 years we were dealing with North Korea. It was sort of like, well, they agreed to reduce their nuclear. They smiled at us in the meeting and so on. Madeleine Albright meeting with them, and but then they just got more aggressive with their nuclear program and not moving anything forward. What did Trump do? Trump took a video of what Pyongyang could look like if they had a more modern economy and they weren't stuck in whatever it is, 1951. And it was this, it looked like Singapore or something like that in the video. And in other words, he's a salesman. He's selling this positive vision instead of just threat. So it's a little bit of, there's the stick and then there's the carrot. So I think we haven't gotten resolution there yet, but I think he's handled Kim pretty well, and we haven't seen any missiles being lobbed over Japan in a few years. So I think we've moved in a positive direction.
I would also add to that too, just to sort of add that, like, and I've run into this maybe with perhaps low information voters, is they think he's an isolationist. They like the word as if we were going to have relationships with the rest of the planet and countries, just being skillfully engaged, with diplomacy or, economic diplomacy to our advantage, and not overextending or being the police of the world that, the United States has classically been for the past, 50 years, or not wanting to. I don't think there's any case that Donald Trump is an isolationist, or they think that, but he doesn't like countries. He doesn't want to have any relationship that's just absurd on its face. And even though I still have these conversations with people, like, I don't know if you guys are having regular conversations with other voters like that, Trump voters, and having those conversations, but I often find that there's a mistaken belief that somehow he isn't interested in having the best possible relationships with other countries. In fact, wants to shut off relationships with the world, which, he isn't. He's clearly a skillful negotiator. And I'm curious as to how many of you may have read Art of the Deal out of the 20-something people who are still in the chat.
Yeah, I have.
Just by a show of hands or a thumbs up or something in that.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Just a follow-up question, Matthew, because I know you've expressed your distaste for this kind of military-industrial complex. Do you think if President Trump were to be reelected, he should reduce the Pentagon budget?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Any reduction of the Pentagon budget is a good thing. Any reduction of the war state is a good thing. Reduction of troops, pull them out of Afghanistan, pull them out of the rest of the world. The 700 bases that they're still in, there's no reason to take the money, take it out of the Pentagon, put it back in where it's needed, put it back in real people and real jobs and education. For real, there does not need to be more money. at all interested in swelling their budgets anymore.
Okay.
Well,
Just one more.
Whether he'll do that, we'll see.
Can I add just a little point to that real quickly? So I agree that we should not have troops all over the world and be the police of the world. And that's a huge difference or departure from classic, I guess, Republican thought. Because again, I don't actually think of myself as one, I think of myself as a conservative. But I do think though that the right approach for America, we still are as the freest country on the earth, we have the most responsibility, and it's always going to be that way. And until someone becomes as free as we are. And so I feel that I don't know anything about budgets for military, but I think they need to have it at a sweet spot where we're considered somebody that you don't mess with ever. And so like the whole peace through strength philosophy. So that I feel like we have to have an incredible fighting machine that is ready at all times, because that's the only way that you can protect yourself. People will not attack you if you're, strong. And so you have to maintain a readiness that obviously requires money. I just don't think it should be inflated or exaggerated just to like line people's pockets or, have fluff in the whole complex, like you said, the military industrial complex. I don't think that's necessary. But whatever it takes to be ready at all times and no one will ever mess with us, I think that's what it should be.
Okay, I have one more question. That's for you, Jennifer. And after that, we'll open it up to the audience. Regarding the pandemic, I think you had described it as president has done a good job or a brilliant job, I think. If there's one thing in retrospect, if he could turn back time, what do you think he should have done differently, knowing what we know now?
Yeah, what I think could have been definitely, I think that we should have relied more on our own intelligence rather than the WHO and China information that we were getting out of them. I think there was a period where now it's come out that they knew that there was human-to-human transmission as early as late November, and the information that was coming out of China was very slim. They didn't acknowledge that there were any such cases until January, and that's when the WHO said the same thing. Now, and we can debate the WHO and so on. I think that the organization was, they want to have, they want access in China. They view China as, hey, it's the whatever, 1/5 of the world's people. And in order to be a global organization, we need to have access to China. And so they want access, they want the money, things like this. But so they're not necessarily compromised, but they definitely have interest in believing, contradicting what China has to say. And I think that's what happened. But I think that we should have acted a lot sooner. We should have acted in November and early December, and some of the actions that were taken in January should have been taken sooner. But I don't think anyone really, except for a few, let's call them, there were a few kind of nutty websites, so let's say, or Reddit boards, and I was following them because I was interested in this sort of thing. But they were definitely not in the mainstream. And so would they have been taken seriously? Probably less so, but there were people tracking these sorts of things as early as December. But I think that we should have relied on our own intelligence, which did show that something was going on there, and we didn't have the full information, and start to make some of the decisions that we made a month earlier. And I think we would have slowed things from happening more so than we did.
I would like to add to that to say that I feel that better control of the data should have been implemented sooner. I feel that he took control away from the CDC too late, because the CDC is a private company, it's not, or whatever, it's a company, it's not part of the government, technically speaking. And of course, they never talk about that. They act like it's a government, or an arm of the government, or part of the government, but it's not. And there's so much information online, a lot of it being censored, of course, where they're talking about how cases have been artificially inflated, sometimes accidentally, sometimes intentionally, sometimes based on the fact that hospitals get a certain amount of compensation for calling something, you know, a COVID death or putting people on a ventilator, they get more funding or per patient. And those kind of things should never have happened. So the fact is that there's not a lot of the decisions that were made, like lockdowns and stuff, were not done based on accurate data. And now that people are trying to bring it out, the media wants to suppress it because that was probably the intention all along, was to prolong the lockdowns and use the data to make this a horrible, like much worse than it actually is. And so that part to me is really frightening. I mean, when those doctors that are treating patients came out and tried to speak and say, you know, hydroxychloroquine actually does work. There are, you know, in certain case, like in certain combination with other things, and this is like something that we can deal with now. You don't have to be afraid. They were censored all over the place by big tech. Why? I mean, it's just, to me, that's the most frightening thing. And I wish he would have taken somehow. I mean, he has to delegate things. So I don't know who among his team would have been responsible for this. He's not going to be online every night looking and seeing, you know, data from whatever. So I just don't know who he appointed that didn't do this part right. And so, of course, the buck stops with him. But I feel that control of the data, and also even there was reports all over the place of people, and some of us know people that this happened to, where they signed up to take a test, never showed up for the test, and then got a result in the mail that said you're positive. And so those kind of things were censored everywhere. Why? And so, again, grasping hold of the data and making sure it's accurate so that the decisions that were made that are killing or have been killing the economy and need to be reversed at this point would have been maybe done better.
I would also just agree with that and add, it's interesting that 8 months into this, the majority of people that I talk to, including myself, are as confused, if not more confused, over a subject that we've all been living and studying nonstop for 8 months, that the information wasn't made clearer in meetings, like let's say in just the press conferences, which would also include recovery rates and numbers, which were never fully just put out there. But that for something that has affected all of us, I would say, and I apologize for speaking for everybody, but my experience of talking to people is that unless you've been studying this nonstop, the majority of people are as confused, if not more confused, and you shouldn't have. If we were in school for 8 months taking a course, at the end of that, we should write papers and we'd have some information on this. That is not the case with this. That people are more confused with this, and I think that his meetings and the vice president's meetings, daily briefing, they could have done a little bit better to actually slow down and teach people if that's what we're all supposed to be interested in. And I don't think that's happened. I'm going to put the buck on them for that too. It's not only their responsibility, because as we've seen, there's been a ton of censorship back and forth over who's allowed to come out. You know, Chinese whistleblowers who've worked in Wuhan, no, they get exercised off Twitter. But you know, even Dr. Fauci, who's been elevated to a saint, you know, there'll be a candle for Dr. Fauci at some point, you know, being sold. His own changing opinion. Why haven't even a person allowing to have a change of opinion as information comes in? It's been very confusing, and I think that was handled terribly.
I agree with that, and I just want to add one of the other things that points to the fact that the data is kind of crazy is when they've had all these cases coming out where people say, oh, you know, he died in an accident and he happened to have COVID. He died from the accident, but they call it and report it as a COVID death. That is unacceptable, and that's partly why the cases were so inflated. And then on top of that, the governors of so many Democrat states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, I don't know if New Jersey, but New York, pushing patients, elderly patients with COVID diagnoses back into nursing homes. So I read somewhere, and don't quote me on this, but I think it was 40% of or some high percent, so don't quote me, I'm not good at numbers, but some high percentage of deaths are attributed to to those policies. And some people think it was intentional, and that's really frightening and scary. It never had to happen. Trump gave him the ship, he built the hospital, and it was basically never used. Why weren't those patients put there until they were completely, no risk at all to going back into a nursing home? And so those kind of things, will there ever be an investigation into those things? I don't know. And in those cases, those were state decisions. So I'm maybe getting off the topic of, what could Trump have done better? But I will just go back to saying, like, seizing control of the data and not allowing it to be used for and manipulated for political purposes.
Okay, thanks. Just a point of clarification. I've seen a chat room that CDC is part of the government. I think it's an arm of
It is.
Department of Health. Now you can make an argument that maybe there should be some reforms, or maybe the person that they appointed to be the director of the DHS or CDC were not, up for the job. That's certainly a fair point, but it is part of the federal government.
Well, that's
Okay,
good
so-
to correct me. So I don't know what I was thinking about, but I
Yeah. Okay, just point of clarification. All right, let's go to the Q&A. So here's what we're gonna do. I guess we'll just take turns. Please raise your hand. Don't shout things out. And again, it's going to be limited to what was discussed. We're trying to have a very productive and constructive discussion. So again, we have these presenters who are making an argument in favor of re-election of President Trump. So we're not here to relitigate the Russiagate or the impeachment or the tax returns. All those things are what I call the scandal category, and we just don't have the bandwidth to get into all those issues. We want to talk about the themes that the presenters have brought up. So as you ask those questions, let's try to do it in a non-confrontational, non-adversarial way. Now, you're probably thinking, well, everything is adversarial in politics. True. But I think we could ask them without being such a loaded or leading question. So, and if I find that some of these questions are turning out to be very partisan bickering, I'm just going to use my discretion to move on to the next question. So again, the spirit and intent tonight is to have a very constructive and productive discussion. Hopefully you could ask a question that enhances our understanding to different viewpoints. That's really the takeaway. So with that in mind, we're going to go with Rory first, and then James, you'll be next. So go ahead, Rory.
Rory?
Well, we can't hear him. We can't hear the question.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. I just have a general question. What I've noticed in my general area is that you can't talk to people. And you notice this with, I work for Verizon, and we started to notice that you'll say, I'm on a project with Andrew. No, because Andrew likes Trump and I like Biden. I can't work with him. But that has now become so divisive. It has caused the problem that I see in America, that you just cannot have a conversation almost about anything. Do you see that? Or what would your opinion be about that?
Yeah, well, it's one of the things I'm most bothered by, because I think because I love debate, I love discussion, and when I say debate, I mean like healthy, fun debate where you go for a drink afterward and you don't really hold anything against the person, and maybe you have your mind changed. And I think the first thing that it does, it totally shuts down any possibility for learning, because you can't possibly learn anything from someone that you think isn't human or that you hate. So that number one. And I think we have to somehow dial this back in our culture. If we're to remain one country, we're going to have to figure out a way to dial it back. And I think we need to tone down the very deep ideological nature of our discourse, where it the one side is evil or crazy, stupid, or the other. I mean, it's crazy, evil, stupid. It has to be one of the three. There's no explanation. There's no rational basis for them believing what they believe. I mean, this is not constructive in the slightest. So we've got to find a way to dial it back. The question is, let me address the question behind the question. There are people that claim that Trump this level of, and I'm not sure that part of the.
Oh, Andy, you're cutting out. Is anyone else having trouble hearing him?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit, Andy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would just say I'm not clear on that. I think that definitely he has his interest back, but I think that what values and not just
You're cutting out, Andy. We're not hearing you clearly.
okay.
Everybody not Andy, turn their mics off.
Yeah, when everyone's on mute, I can hear him better.
Maybe it was some background noise. There was some background noise. So let me try again. I'm not sure that Trump is the one that brought. I think that the contentiousness has existed, but it's definitely stepped up, and I think it's partly due to some changes that I'm actually taking this from people like Jonathan Haidt, who have they've got a really nice YouTube video. He would call himself a liberal still, but I think he's a little bit more libertarianish these days. But he's got a really nice video on the 10 causes of the polarization in our political discourse, and he lists a number of them that the parties have gone through their own purification rituals, and that the rise of certain types of ideas on the left, but then certain types of ideas on the right, and but we've got to find a way through this, I think, and I hope we can. And I don't. Maybe it's another discussion, like what solutions to that might.
Well, I just would pop in saying that, look, I think we agree with that, and that in the monasteries, right? Like if any of you have studied, Buddhism, religion, like the very first thing that they learn when you go to the monastery is debate. How to debate. Let's attack the argument. Let's not attack the person. And so when everyone, in our country said we want better education and better, well, that means let's learn how to have constructive conversations. Let's learn our formal and informal fallacies. Learn how to talk to a person versus what we see as debate, like we do in presidential debates, which is sound bites, and then social media, frontal lobe kind of stimulation, and there's no connection, right? There's just this. It's like playing a video game where you can kill people in a video game. There's no empathy to it. So I think that we have a long way to go, as Andy had said, but you're right, Rory. Like I haven't had people. Have I curbed my conversation so that not to get into arguments with people? Yes. Yeah, I still try to be cordial with it, but do I curb what I say? Yes, of course I do. It's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go to.
Can I super add just super quickly, because I love that question. It is sad, and I want to thank all you guys for being here and listening, because this is how it should be. And honestly, like if someone wanted to tell me why they support Biden, I would be happy to listen and talk to them. Like Andy said, I find it exciting to debate. But the interesting thing is that with the polarization, and because I hate to say it, but it's true, Trump supporters are demonized by the media. So it gets some people into a very highly agitated emotional state when they're just even dealing with us. That is completely, I don't know if you guys have heard of the term TDS, which stands for Trump derangement syndrome, but it's really like some people have it really badly. And so I say it lightly to say that every single one of us, every Trump supporter I've ever met has lost a friend or a family member, if not more. And we're the ones that get cut off. We don't do the cutting off. And I'm not saying it's never happened in the reverse direction, but that's just the way it is now. And it's really sad, and I wish it wasn't that way. And again, I'm glad you guys are here to listen, and we can all learn from each other, and we should all talk to each other. That should never stop.
I'll conclude that there was a statistic before Trump in the election. They said that somewhat 60% of people in the family, if they said, I'm going to get married to somebody, they said that they would not like them to be of a different political view. Now it's up to 82%. Families don't even want them. And that's why I thought it was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on to the next person, James, and then Ellen. Go ahead, James.
Yes, in our system of government, the primary agency that is responsible for the economy, for maintaining low inflation and full employment, is the Federal Reserve. Would you not credit the Federal Reserve for having actually done a very, very good job, both in the Obama administration and in the current administration. And related to that, why on earth would you cut taxes when you have a strong economy, as the government did, except just line the pockets of people who don't need it? Frankly, I appreciated the tax cut. I didn't need it. Why not? Why? It's counterintuitive. You would wait for times that are not good, and then you get a multiplier as the money goes round. But I don't understand at all Trump's economic policy. And in fact, I think it's damaging to the country. That's an opinion. But so the questions are firstly on the Federal Reserve. And secondly, why on earth would you cut taxes when you have a strong economy?
Okay, so let me take the second one first on the tax cuts, and I'll come back to the Fed. The thing that I think that one of the main rationales, and I think that one of the best cases for tax cuts that Trump made was that the United States, prior to tax cuts, was not competitive with other countries, and I'm talking about all of Europe and so on, in terms of corporate taxes. And corporate taxes, we can say, wow, corporations, it's just tax corporations. But the United States was, I think it was prior to the tax cuts, it was something like 35% was the top tax rate in the United States, whereas the average in Europe was in the low 20s. And we cut I think there are some exceptions, but most corporations went to something like 21% in the United States. So we became more in line with European countries. And I think it's even.
Andy, you mentioned the inversions that were going on when Obama was in office. Do you remember the inversions? Why don't you explain that?
Right. So there were the company that I was working for at the time was Pfizer, and Pfizer is a New York-based pharmaceutical company. It's a huge company, over 100,000 employees, and they were intent on merging with a company at the time called Activist, which became part of Allergan, which that company is actually domiciled in Ireland, where they have a very low corporate tax. And Pfizer wanted to do a reverse merger with Activist, that Pfizer would have actually been buying this company, but they wanted to treat it like this Activist or Allergan was buying them, so that they could end up being an Irish company. And they would have kept their headquarters, everything in New York, as far as I know, but they would have ended up paying much less corporate taxes than what they were previously. So I think that was something that, no, it doesn't necessarily hit on the issue of economic fairness, but I think it was an issue of competitiveness between the United States and other countries. But the other thing I would point out on corporate taxes is that, in a sense, I mean, corporate taxes are paid for by other people, that the corporation is just a group of people working together. In the end, when you raise corporate taxes, you're raising taxes on consumers, employees, or customers, because they just pass these taxes on to other people. But there were tax cuts in net that were really not as great as I mean, the biggest cuts were in the corporate taxes, and then there was a middle class tax cut, but they were countered to some degree by tax increases in terms of getting rid of the state and local tax deduction. I've ended up paying more taxes under Trump than or after that tax act. And I guess I do okay, but I ended up paying more taxes because I can't take that as much of that deduction. I'm okay with it, but most people did see. I think it was on the order of something $1,600 tax cut was the average. But why do that during a boom? I think that it was part of the deal to get a more, what they considered a better tax structure, one that would drive incentives better. Whether that was the best instrument to do it or not is a different matter, but that was the thinking. Now, on the Fed, I think, yes, we do have to credit the Fed with QE and so on. I think that I'm not sure that there are limits to the monetary policy. There are limits to fiscal, what we can achieve with fiscal policy. The danger with continually extending these quantitative easings is that, as Keynes put it, that we be pushing on a string, that we run out of the bullets. And I'm, that we're to that point now, where how much more can the Fed do? That they were raising the interest rates going into COVID, and they basically have cut them back to zero. So I think that that was, they were actually, in one sense, they were implementing a counter-cyclical policy by raising interest rates as the economy was improving going into COVID, but then they had to cut it with COVID. So I don't disregard the Fed's role. I think the Fed's played a positive role.
Okay, let's go.
I still feel that the.
Sorry,
first
James,
one
we got to
is-
move on. Sorry, we don't have time.
My question's on
James.
timing, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, we have a lot of hands and we're
Yeah.
almost running out of time, so we don't have time for back and forth. Sorry about that. One question per person, please, just because we have a lot of hands. Ellen, and then Pete, you're next. So Ellen?
I just wanted to ask the panel if they have any particular opinions why the election of President Trump caused such a visceral, angry reaction before the man even got into the White House. It was really apparent to me, because I remember calling up a friend of mine in January of 17 and saying, have you ever seen anything like this? He was really getting attacked from the get-go. And I'm wondering, what is it about this election that sent people into such a tizzy like we've never seen before?
That's a good question. Jen, you want to start with that one?
I think, well, it is a really good question. And I actually super appreciate it so much. And I'm not, how can I say? So when I started looking into, how could Romney lose to Obama and going down the rabbit hole, you learn a lot about the agendas that are in this world. Some people can call it conspiracy theory. Other people can say, no, that's not true. But I feel a lot of it is evident all around us. And some of us, we see certain things and say, that doesn't make sense, just kind of like the question you're asking now. And so I think that the groundwork had been laid for the push toward, because the left has gone way far left, right? I don't think most people would disagree with that. They've departed from like what's been a traditional Democrat leftist position, including with like the speech codes. And that's probably maybe one of the number ones, because, does free speech even exist anymore? And how you can like lose your job if you just make the wrong comment to somebody, like offhand, not even at work. So I think that because that, and that comes from like the push toward like that Marxist ideology, leftism, socialism, like going super hard left, right? So I'm not talking about, the general liberal position. And so I think because so much of the culture had been pushed intentionally in that direction, and they knew that Trump was going to come in, like he's the reaction to that, of the pendulum swinging back against that. The people that orchestrated that were extremely angry that their plans were being thwarted midstream. And so they created.
Hillary wasn't that leftist. I mean, Hillary was not the leftist candidate. They
Which
did
person? Which person?
Out.
Which person?
I'm talking about the 2016 election.
Right.
Right. Yeah. No.
The leftist. Remember, they did everything to keep Bernie from winning. They pushed Hillary.
Right. But that's probably because, I can't speak to like all of lefty politics. I agree with you on that. But see, then you start getting into like the power and agenda, the power control agenda things, where it's like she had been, ordained basically, and she did her time and she to use an old term from a long time ago, she was a carpetbagger into New York, you know, to like get her Senate credentials, and instead of from Arkansas, where she's from. So like she was the lady in waiting, and the left people didn't want her, they wanted Bernie. And so even if he was better for their positions, they were just like, no, we're not having that. And even look at that, like they cheated Bernie out of it. And not once, now twice. Like that's so wrong. Like, and he's still like Trump calls him, like he says he needs the greatest sportsmanship award. And it's true, like his party betrayed him. That's what his party wanted. But I think, make no mistake though, she still would have implemented and kept implementing it, like just in a nicer package, I guess you could say. The package that had been created and was in waiting for that coronation type thing.
Okay, so let me speak to that a bit, is that I think what we've seen, and again, I'm going to touch on Jonathan Haidt, that I think what we've seen emerge, especially among younger people, and I don't want to just say among the left. I mean, they may tend to be leftish because they're younger and so on. They probably, to be quite honest, don't really know what their ideological views are yet, but they tend to talk leftish. But I think some conservatives make a mistake that think that they're left already. But it's what he calls safetyism, this idea that they should be protected from harm, that harm can come from words, and that it's physical harm actually comes from words. And that if you hear this bad word, you can't just say, oh, you're full of crap, I disagree with you, or I'm going to vote you down because I don't like you. No, you've been physically harmed by this person. And so it's perfectly rational to cause harm to them because they hurt you physically and you're defending yourself. So it's a viewpoint that is encouraged by social media, where there's cascading effects, and you have a instant cheering corner. That if you're confronted by someone that you've got a significant number of followers, and you're confronted by someone that you disagree with, and they say some tart thing, salty thing against you, you've got this this swarm effect to jump on the person that assaulted. And so I think our culture has and I would say that it's more among younger people that have grown up in social media as part of their lives. I mean, I'm an older guy. I grew up, I always had a computer, and when I was growing up, but didn't have anything like the internet until I got in it was like the very early 90s, and when I was in college. But there wasn't like the social media and the intensity of it that you have today, where everybody's on it all the time. And so I think it's created, but the irony, that Haidt also brings up is that amid all this, that maybe the tragedy is that suicide rates among younger people are through the roof. I mean, they're like 200-300% higher than what they were 10 years ago. The depression, anxiety, all of these mental illnesses are much higher. And
right, but what does that have to do with the?
Sorry, Ellen. So I got to interrupt.
We have
getting answered. Sorry, we have a lot of questions. Yeah, sorry.
I'll say it in 2 words. Ready?
Yeah,
he represents a primal masculinity that gets under people's skin, and that they think that we at this point have exercised out of society, that he's a pushback, goomba speaking guy that doesn't, we're supposed to have an elevated Obama-esque leader, and he's tripled down on the kind of toxic masculinity that is supposed to have been, cut out like a cancer or a wart. And he's not that. And I think that people respond so viscerally is because he's saying, no, this is part of the national character. You might prefer people to be differently. He's not that, and will not change that. The office did not change him for that. And I think that's why people are deeply dislike him, is because he doesn't and will not put the political shellac on his own Twitter or his own language or his own having just a rally in front of thousands of people talking off the cuff and cursing. That's why.
Okay. Just in interest of time, if you could just limit your question to just one question, just because we do have a lot of people waiting. So let's go with Pete, and then after that, Kyrie. So go ahead, Pete.
Hey guys, I just want to talk more about the COVID record, which I think is probably the most important issue on people's minds. So Trump, he cut pandemic funding and he's opposed lockdowns and social distancing, compared to what we see in other countries. But the US has more COVID deaths per capita than these other countries, right? We've had 200,000 deaths, which is a number validated by the Trump administration as well. And it's, validated by, how many more deaths in 2019 than we have in 2020. So the question is, what is Trump going to do differently as the pandemic continues? Or why is doing the same thing going to be a good idea given how poorly the US has fared?
Well, so I'll speak to a couple of things. The one thing I would point out is that if you look on a per capita basis, like for example, right now, there's been what's been called this sort of echo effect, or that we've had this spike in new cases. Now, one, I would point out that the recovery rate is higher than it was in the beginning, that we understand more about treating this than we did. We're not putting people on ventilators, for example. My wife's grandmother died of COVID in April. And I think that it was because they were too quick to put her on a ventilator. My mother currently has COVID. She's in a nursing home, not in New York, but in Indiana. And my brother and I refused to put her on a ventilator. She's getting better now. And so I think that, and this has been at the doctor's guidance too, but so I think that we've learned about treating this better. And so we're seeing a much better recovery rate than we were seeing in the initial stages. But looking at the case rate, if you look at the case rate per capita, right now there's a spike that's happening globally. And the United States is lower on per capita basis than most of Europe, a country like Belgium. If we've seen something like 80,000 cases in the last month. And if you compare that with, say, Belgium, I think I saw the statistics today, it was something like 376,000 if you adjust it on a per capita basis. Germany was about the same level that we were. So some of the Italy, I think, was a little bit higher than the United States, but there were some standouts that were much higher than the United States. So we're in a way we're right now at performing at a rate, I'd say performing, but it's like the per capita rate is in line with the best countries in Europe in terms of treating it. Germany has really been a standout in Europe in terms of their success and keeping the case rate down. And we're right in line with Germany, or a little bit above them. But in terms of the initial, if you want to look at the overall cases, I think there's one thing that I think we have to look at. I mean, look at the number of deaths from influenza this year. The number of deaths from influenza, it's collapsed by something like 98%, as recorded by the CDC. And so what's happening is that a lot of things are being called COVID that wouldn't have been called COVID. Now, I'm not going to bring up these cases of whatever, somebody's in a car accident, they call it COVID or something. These kinds of things are outliers. I'm not claiming that's a broad thing, but I do think there are these influenza-like illnesses that COVID is one of those. And so there are some things like that would have been called flu, influenza, it would have been called pneumonia, and a death from pneumonia in earlier years that we're calling COVID death. So it's not to say that we shouldn't do something about it or do something different, but I think we may be reclassifying some things and putting more urgency on this, not putting it in perspective. And so we're calling less deadly diseases COVID, which has this sort of emotional trigger effect.
Okay, next question is Kyrie. Go ahead, Kyrie.
The what?
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Barely.
Hold on, sorry.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Thank you, guys. So even though I am actually kind of on your side and I agree with you guys, there still are like these just, I guess, personality issues and more so verbal issues that we have ongoing. And it's hard to ignore. Being a person of, being a minority person, being a Black man, and given what Jared Kushner said not but 24 hours ago. So my real question is, even though I appreciate and can point to all the successes he has done for minority people, and especially Black Americans, as you can see by the latest couple comments in the chat, he is still perceived in a certain manner. And yes, the media does help that along, but just like what Jared Kushner said to Black folks, I can definitely turn around and say it to Mr. Trump. So do you see, or how would you convince other Black voters to go your way and then reconvince Black voters to vote for him again, knowing that your party does not need our vote to win?
Yeah.
I would like to start on that one. I would say that me personally, I never look at it as what we need or don't need to win. And I do fault the Republican Party up until Trump came around for not doing enough outreach. And again, for anyone in the chat that didn't hear, my daughter is mixed race. So like I have a personal stake in it, I feel, but of course it's not the same as being a Black voter. So I just feel like with the craziest part about it though is that conservative values are and do have a lot of overlap with Black cultural values. And so that to me has always been the craziest part. And I don't know if it was just they were afraid that they would just be like run out of town if they tried, or they just didn't care enough, or was it a combination of both? Or was the charge of it's a racist party just too much to overcome and they didn't have the bandwidth to even try to think about it? And if they, I mean, because you're looking at what, 90 something percent that vote Democrat, or some very high number, maybe like around there. So like, so it's a pretty like insurmountable thing. And then you're talking about 12 or 13% of the population. So it's like almost basically 1/10, and then 90% of that is against you. So maybe you just figure, we have to spend our time elsewhere because they're not gonna listen to us. So I kind of feel like it was the fault of both sides in that way, because I feel like we didn't feel well. When I say we, I don't mean me, but conservatives didn't feel welcomed in the community. And then we were also like not trying ourselves. So that's the first thing I would like to say. As far as Trump, he's never been called a racist before this. So I just think that's all I need to hear. Like, to me, that it's a complete media fabrication. And he's from a certain generation that going back like decades, did he ever say something? I don't know. I never heard of it, but like if they can dig something up, I don't know. I mean, he's a baby boomer very firmly in that category. Things were different 50, 60 years ago, and he comes from that time. So is he not perfect on race? Of course, but who is perfect on any subject or with any demographic? And so I just feel that, again, the slander of calling someone a racist or saying they don't care about a certain group of people because of their color is one of the most horrible things you can ever accuse somebody of. And unless you have unless they have basically a KKK hood as like proof of their like racism or something, or they do overt actions that are racist, I don't see how you can, not you, but I don't see how they can be tarred with that and that like accepted without the evidence. And so I just think that it's not even an issue. And I would just encourage anyone who feels that it is because of what they have personally experienced or seen of him to dig a little deeper and look further, and especially at the stories of people who have changed their minds, because they are probably able to speak your experience better than I obviously could. And so if you see what turned their mind, then that would be, I think, the place to start.
Okay.
It's also, yeah. No.
Sorry. I do need to wrap it up, but yeah, Matthew, just real quick, and then because I have to.
I was just going to say that in the same way also that like a week before the election, you're not voting for Jared Kushner in the same way that you're not voting for Hunter Biden.
Okay, fair point. I do need to wrap it up here in a few minutes because I have another engagement. But let me ask you guys just kind of like a closing question, which is this. It's a two-part question. One is, here we are Tuesday night. Next Tuesday is November 3rd. So what does President Trump need to do? Because right now it's a very close race. So number one, what does he need to do? Number two, at some point, whether if he's reelected or not, what will happen to MAGA? How will that legacy carry on? Is there someone else that will carry that torch? So it's a two-part question. Any one of you could start it and we'll wrap it up on that note.
Yeah, it's not, let me just say this, that it doesn't go away with Trump, that Trump has he's already changed the Republican Party, but what it will mean is that the transition will have to be carried by other people. There will be a number of people vying for that. The people that were, I will say this, the people that were anti-Trump that still called themselves Republicans, they are finished. They're not going to get any support. They're done. They're going to have to find a home on the left or somewhere else. But they're not going to be listened to. But there'll be a number. If Trump loses, then it would be you'll see a battle between people like Rubio, Rand Paul, these types of people that may represent different factions actually, but they will have a more populist message, and they may change some of their viewpoints in order to fit that populist viewpoint. But I don't think that style is going to go away at all. It will be certainly toned down by someone else, but if Trump wins, then I'll just say this: he will complete the transition of the Republican Party to being more of a working class and middle class party, and the establishment that existed from the Bush years and carried on during the McCain leadership and Romney leadership, that will be completely gone. And they will either change or go to Democrats. But I think that Trump will complete his transition of the party. And no, it's not. By the way, it's a party that I think is one that's focused on working class and middle class. I don't mean white people. I mean all people. And I think that Trump is actually very focused on that. And I think that I would just say this, that I've known, I grew up in the Democratic Party. I grew up being involved in the Democratic Party. And I'm not going to say, the people that I knew that were staunch Democrats and activists, they weren't racist. But then again, the people that I've met in the Republican Party, nobody's been, had any kind of negative viewpoints on race. And it just shocks me to hear these kinds of things, because it's been so contrary to my experience of people that are actually on the ground involved in politics. They want to get every vote they can. But what I will say is that I think a certain style of Republican, like Bush, I don't think he courted the black vote at all. I don't think he even tried. He barely tried, and he got what he got. And McCain ran against Obama, and so he wasn't going to get a lot of vote, but Republican Party didn't even try in those years. I think Donald Trump is trying, and I think that's a step forward. So anyway, I don't think MAGA is going away. That's my own view.
Yeah. Can we each answer that one to close? I would love to add to that. So I agree that it's not going away. As far as what he needs to do, I think he's doing it. He's had a relentless campaign schedule. I don't know if anyone's been following it, and if you have not seen one of his rallies, I encourage you, even if you already sent in your vote for Biden, just to witness the historical impact of what he actually has created, which I think is a phenomenon that the world in its entirety, in all of its history, has never seen. He's drawn thousands of people for 5 years, and people will wait. I went to the New Jersey rally personally, and it was cold. It was January, and I waited outside overnight for 15 hours. So, and I mean, it's an incredible experience, and to hear him speak about everything, live is just great. So he's doing that. And again, you can watch it on Right Side Broadcasting Network on YouTube. And as far as the future of MAGA, I don't think any of the career politicians that ever had like you mentioned Rubio, I don't think he has a future as a MAGA Republican. He can be there, like we'll let him hang around, but I think it belongs to people like Devin Nunes, Matt Gaetz, for example, even people that have been activists for MAGA, like Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch. I think he could be brought in to an administration that continues the process. I honestly think that the rage that is being perpetuated in the streets right now is partly because the people organizing that activity are afraid that MAGA will be entrenched and that their plans to bring socialism and then communism here are ruined forever, or at least set back very seriously. And that's why the rage is so intense right now, because they know if he wins, it will not be a blip in history. And I think that even if they, he doesn't win, and I don't think that's possible unless they cheat with mail-in, I'll be honest with you, because if you see with your own eyes the enthusiasm that he has, it's impossible that doesn't translate into votes. But I think that if he were to lose the election, he could even still do rallies and people would go. And so I feel that until a new leader is established, he could be still the leader. And in 4 years, I think people would realize the mistake that they made. And because the thing is, conservative values that, again, the rhinos becoming globalists were not perpetuating for us, they have been awakened. Like we have been awakened to be activists, even if we're not as vocal as, and we're not going to, rampage in the streets. But the American spirit conservatism has a lot to do with the American spirit and patriotism and freedom. And people do not want that ever to go away. So we're definitely not going anywhere. And like I said, the Trump train takes all comers. We have so much fun and we love winning. So you're all welcome.
Absolutely. I would just say that, what we know, the people in New York, the level of diversity of Trump voters, just for everybody on this call right now, I hope you understand that the actual level of Hispanic, Black, gay, trans, every age, male,
Muslim,
female, everything in between is there. It's all there. It's there in it's unbelievable. And so I think it's going to be more and more over the next 4 years, like realizing that this is America. It's not a white supremacist, thing. It's completely a made up thing. Donald Trump is going to keep doing exactly what he's been doing. And yeah, the future of that is that, he's brought to the table for independents, Republicans, is that it's a standard that the Bush era Republicans, I think the Republicans that they think that Donald Trump is, his level of populism has changed the Republican Party for the generation. And anybody who is fake mouthing that is giving lip service to the things that it's not hollow, because what he does is when you read what he writes, there's a heft to it, or when he says things, there's a tone of like, I sense that energy. You can't fake that. And so if candidates in the future aren't real, they're not going to get voted for. Like I think at least Republicans, which I don't consider myself a Republican, but I can smell it when it's real. Like, which is the reason why let's say the Democrats have not allowed somebody to be Trump. The Democrats have not their own Trump, and let's see in 2024 if they are allowed to run someone like a Sanders, well, he won't again, but like a Tulsi Gabbard, or somebody who is able to be off leash. And I think Trump has taught the Republicans that, see, you can be off leash and you actually win. You actually win when you're off leash. So that's all.
Okay.
And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer, Matthew, Andy. Appreciate you guys joining us. And I know some of you had your hands up. Sorry we couldn't get to you, Andrew, Tainer, and Kyle. We just ran out of time. Hopefully you found tonight's presentation persuasive. And if you are not persuaded, at least you could gain some fresh perspectives, because there is another side of America that we need to at least have a conversation with. And this week is quite active for this group, because we actually have 2 more virtual meetups On Thursday, we're going to talk about the future of the U.S. Supreme Court in light of the appointment and swearing in of Justice Amy Barrett. And then on Saturday, we'll have the closing arguments for Joe Biden. So get ready for that. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Stay safe, be well. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.